parents bought a timeshare in the 90s, genuinely loved it for years, took the same reliable, predictable vacation nearly every single summer without having to think much about the logistics. Now, in their 70s, they just want out, tired of the annual bill and no longer able to travel as often as they once did. They've tried listing it for sale. Nobody wants it. They've tried giving it away for free. Still nobody wants it. And that specific detail is the part that genuinely confused them at first. Here's the part that stops most people cold. Even at $0, giving the timeshare away doesn't make the obligation disappear, because the maintenance fees attached to it are perpetual, meaning whoever takes it on inherits an annual bill that rises every single year, forever, which is exactly why nobody's taking it. Here's the number that should stop you mid-scroll. The average timeshare buyer pays roughly $25,000 upfront, and according to industry estimates, goes on to pay somewhere around $44,000 more in maintenance fees alone over the following 20 years. Fees that climb whether or not the owner ever actually uses the property again. And that figure doesn't even include occasional special assessments or the interest on any financing used for the original purchase. This isn't a video telling you every timeshare owner got scammed, or that vacation ownership is inherently evil and everyone who's ever bought one made a mistake. It's a video about a specific structural feature almost nobody explains during the sales presentation: the fact that this particular kind of ownership was built to be nearly impossible to exit once the initial excitement of the vacation itself has faded. Let me show you exactly how that works. My name is Alex, and today on Wealth Adjacent, we're taking apart the vacation product people end up paying to escape. Quick disclaimer, not financial advice, just documented data on how timeshare ownership actually functions long-term, drawn from industry reports and consumer protection sources. Let's meet Miguel's parents. Bought during a real vacation, genuinely enjoyed the property for over a decade, made real memories there as a family. The problem was never that they didn't get value out of it early on. It's that the exit was never actually built into the product in any straightforward way, something they only discovered decades later. Here's the actual mechanism, worth understanding clearly from the start. Most timeshare contracts include what's called a perpetuity clause, meaning the ownership obligation, and the annual maintenance fees that come with it, doesn't have a natural end date built into the agreement at all. It continues indefinitely, for as long as the resort itself operates, and in most cases, transfers directly to heirs after the original owner passes away, unless specific legal steps get taken in advance to formally refuse the inheritance, a process most families have never heard of until they're already dealing with it firsthand. Here's the part that should make you sit up. This is precisely why timeshares frequently can't be given away for free. Not because nobody likes the property or the vacations it provides, but because accepting one means accepting a rising, perpetual financial obligation attached to it, one that continues regardless of whether the new owner ever actually visits the resort at all. A rational buyer, or even someone offered it as a genuine gift from a family member, has to weigh accepting real estate against inheriting a bill that increases every year with no natural stopping point, a calculation that frequently comes out as a firm no once the actual math gets run honestly. Run the actual math on what that perpetual fee structure means over time. The average annual maintenance fee in 2025 sits around $1,550, and industry data shows these fees climbing somewhere between 5 and 10% most years, sometimes considerably more during a single sharp increase. One recent industry report documented a year-over-year jump of more than 17%. A fee starting at $1,500 can realistically approach $3,000 within a decade, without the owner using the property any differently than before, and without any single dramatic event triggering the increase, just the steady, compounding nature of annual percentage growth applied year after year. Where does the resale collapse actually come from? A meaningful share of the original purchase price covers the sales and marketing behind the presentation itself, commissions, the resort's marketing budget, the cost of running those lengthy presentations in the first place, not the underlying real estate value, which means the resale market was never pricing in anything close to what buyers originally paid, even in a best-case scenario with a well-maintained, desirable property. Combine that with a rising, perpetual fee obligation attached to whatever's being resold, and the math from a potential buyer's perspective frequently comes out negative before any actual vacation value gets factored in at all. Since a buyer isn't just paying a low price, they're accepting a stream of future payments with no clear endpoint in exchange. There's a specific detail worth naming around the resale market's actual mechanics too. since it explains why prices have collapsed as dramatically as they have, well beyond what a normal illiquid asset would experience. A significant share of timeshares listed for resale sell for a single dollar, or literally get given away, specifically because the seller's actual goal is escaping the ongoing maintenance fee obligation, not recovering any of the original purchase price at all. Once enough sellers are effectively paying buyers to take the obligation off their hands, in the form of an artificially low or even negative net price, once transfer costs are considered, the entire resale market reflects that dynamic rather than any traditional sense of real estate value based on location, size, or amenities. There's a specific pattern worth naming directly, since it's become an entire secondary industry of its own, feeding off exactly the frustration this video is describing. Once an owner tries to exit and discovers how difficult it actually is, a wave of timeshare exit companies exist specifically to help, charging real upfront fees, sometimes several $1,000s, for a service that doesn't always succeed, and in the worst documented cases, doesn't exist at all beyond collecting the upfront payment and disappearing entirely. The Federal Trade Commission has specifically and repeatedly warned about this exact category of scam. One exploitative situation quietly generating a second one layered directly on top of it, targeting the exact people already most financially and emotionally exhausted by the first problem entirely. There's a specific pattern worth naming around how these exit scams typically present themselves too, since recognizing the pattern in advance matters as much as simply knowing it exists somewhere out there. A common version involves an unsolicited call or advertisement promising a guaranteed exit for a flat upfront fee, often accompanied by pressure to act quickly before some vaguely defined opportunity expires. A structure that should sound genuinely familiar, since it mirrors the exact urgency tactics used in the original timeshare sales presentation, just aimed at the opposite transaction entirely. There's a specific detail worth naming around legitimate exit paths too, since they do genuinely exist even though they're considerably harder to find than the original purchase ever was, and worth listing clearly rather than treating the entire situation as completely hopeless. Rescission periods, a short legal window right after signing during which a buyer can cancel with absolutely no penalty whatsoever, exist in most states, though they typically last only a matter of days, meaning the single easiest exit only exists in the earliest possible moment, right when a new owner is least likely to be thinking critically about it. A deed-back program, where the resort itself agrees to formally take the property back, sometimes exists but isn't guaranteed or automatically offered by every single developer, and often comes with its own specific eligibility requirements attached. Working directly with an attorney who specializes specifically in this area is frequently the more reliable, if more expensive, legitimate path once the rescission window has already closed and no deed-back option is available. There's a psychological pattern worth naming here too, similar to others we've covered on this channel. The original sales presentation is specifically structured around vacation excitement, a genuinely relaxed, happy moment spent somewhere beautiful, which is precisely the wrong emotional state to be evaluating a decades-long financial obligation in. High-pressure tactics, time-limited, today-only pricing, and genuinely appealing gifts for simply attending the presentation are well-documented industry patterns, all working together to compress a major financial decision into a single emotionally charged afternoon, far removed from the careful, unhurried comparison shopping most people would apply to a similarly sized purchase made anywhere else. There's a specific pattern worth naming around the framing used during these presentations too, since the language itself does real persuasive work well beyond just the pricing discussion. Terms like vacation ownership or investment in memories deliberately steer the conversation away from language that would trigger normal financial scrutiny, real estate, contract, perpetual obligation, in favor of emotionally resonant framing that makes a five-figure decision feel more like a lifestyle choice than the binding legal commitment it actually turns out to be. There's a specific pattern worth naming around points-based timeshares too, since the structure has shifted considerably from the traditional fixed-week model many people still picture when they hear the word timeshare at all. A large share of newer timeshare products are sold as points, redeemable across a network of properties rather than tied to one specific week at one specific resort, marketed specifically around that added flexibility. The flexibility genuinely appeals to buyers during the sales pitch, but the underlying maintenance fee obligation functions identically to the traditional model, perpetual, rising annually, and just as difficult to exit once signed, regardless of how modern or flexible the point system itself feels in comparison. There's a specific scale worth naming too, since this isn't some niche or unusual product limited to a small handful of unlucky buyers who simply made an isolated bad decision on their own. Roughly 10 million American households currently own some form of timeshare, in an industry generating over $10 billion in annual sales, which means the specific structural pattern this video describes affects a genuinely large number of families, not an isolated edge case that only happens to a rare unlucky few. A product this widespread deserves the same level of scrutiny as any other major financial commitment of comparable size, the kind of scrutiny a house or a car purchase would normally receive as a matter of course. There's a specific detail worth naming about the sales presentation itself, since the format is remarkably consistent across the industry and worth recognizing clearly in the moment it's happening. These presentations typically run 90 minutes to 2 hours, specifically timed to wear down resistance through sheer duration, often paired with a genuinely appealing incentive just for attending, a free excursion, a discounted stay, sometimes cash paid directly. The incentive isn't inherently dishonest on its own, but its specific purpose is getting a prospective buyer into a room for long enough that a major financial decision starts to feel like the path of least resistance, rather than something requiring the same scrutiny as any other five-figure purchase made anywhere else in life. Back to Miguel's parents. Across roughly 30 years of ownership, between the original purchase price and 3 decades of steadily climbing maintenance fees, using industry averages as a reasonable estimate for their situation, they've paid a genuinely substantial sum, likely somewhere in the range of $60,000 to $70,000 total, for a property currently worth close to nothing on the resale market, and one nobody, including extended family, wants to inherit even at zero cost. That's not a story about being careless with money or making an obviously bad decision at the time. It's a story about a product specifically engineered to make the exit considerably harder to find than the entrance ever was. A structural asymmetry built into the contract from the very beginning. It's worth being honest about the genuine value side of this too. Many timeshare owners, especially in the early years, get real, substantial vacation value from consistent, predictable annual trips, sometimes to properties considerably nicer than what a comparable hotel budget would otherwise provide. The problem was never that timeshares provide zero value. It's that the specific structure, perpetual and difficult to exit, means the value calculation has to account for decades into the future, not just the vacations already enjoyed. There's a specific detail worth naming around special assessments too, since they layer directly on top of the already rising annual fees and rarely get mentioned during the original sales pitch at all. Beyond the standard maintenance fee, owners can be billed additional, often unpredictable special assessments for major repairs, storm damage, or renovations to the resort property. Charges that arrive separately from the predictable annual bill and can run into thousands of dollars depending on the scope of the work required. These assessments aren't optional or negotiable at the individual owner level, since the obligation to fund shared property upkeep is built directly into the ownership structure itself, regardless of an individual owner's personal financial situation that particular year. So here's the actual check, worth running before signing anything at a timeshare presentation, regardless of how appealing the incentive for attending happens to be. Ask directly and specifically what the exit process looks like, in writing, not verbally, and specifically ask whether the obligation is perpetual and transfers to heirs after death. If a presenter can't or won't give a clear written answer to that specific question, treat the hesitation itself as the answer, since a legitimate, confident answer to a fair question should never require deflection or vague reassurance instead. For anyone already inside an existing timeshare, a few practical moves fall out of that. Check the specific rescission period that applied at signing, since some contracts include state-mandated cancellation rights that get overlooked in the moment and, in rare cases, remain technically available longer than assumed. Contact a resort directly about a deed-back program before paying any third-party exit company a cent, since some resorts genuinely will take a property back at no cost specifically to avoid the reputational and administrative burden of a long-term delinquent account. And if hiring outside help becomes necessary, verify the company's legitimacy specifically through your state's Attorney General Consumer Protection Office before paying any upfront fee, since a legitimate firm will have a verifiable track record and won't object to that specific kind of scrutiny. There's a specific credit impact detail worth naming too, since unpaid maintenance fees don't simply disappear if an owner stops paying out of frustration or genuine financial hardship. Delinquent maintenance fees can be sent to collections and reported to credit bureaus the same as any other unpaid debt, meaning walking away informally, without going through a legitimate exit process, can damage credit standing years after someone assumed the timeshare was simply a sunk cost they'd already stopped thinking about entirely. It's worth being honest about the objections here too, since presenting only one side of this topic wouldn't be fair or complete. First, isn't this a little unfair to the industry? Don't a lot of owners genuinely enjoy their timeshares for decades without ever wanting out at all? Completely fair, and genuinely true for a real share of owners, this isn't a claim that every timeshare experience ends in regret. This isn't a claim that every timeshare is secretly a disaster. It's specifically about the structural difficulty of exiting for the owners who do eventually want to. A real, documented pattern regardless of how many owners never personally encounter it during their own ownership. Second objection. Isn't buying real estate always somewhat illiquid? Isn't this just a normal feature of property ownership, rather than something uniquely bad about timeshares specifically? Worth taking seriously, rather than dismissing outright. Traditional real estate, even in a slow market, can usually be sold for something, some real dollar amount, reflecting genuine market value, and ownership doesn't typically transfer an escalating annual obligation to unwilling heirs the way a timeshare structurally does. The specific combination of a collapsed resale market and a perpetual, rising fee attached to the property is considerably more specific to timeshare structures than to real estate ownership broadly, which is precisely the distinction worth understanding clearly before signing. So here's where we land, plainly. This isn't about every timeshare owner being a victim, or every vacation ownership product being secretly predatory from the very start. It's about a specific structural feature, perpetual obligation with a collapsed exit market, that almost never gets explained clearly during a sales presentation built around vacation excitement rather than careful financial disclosure. Miguel is now helping his parents work directly with an attorney who specializes specifically in timeshare exits, a slower, more expensive process than they genuinely like, but a considerably more reliable one than the exit companies advertising instant results for a flat upfront fee. The point was never that vacation ownership itself is a scam, or that every single owner who's ever signed one of these contracts made a genuinely foolish decision at the time. It's that a product genuinely worth understanding fully before signing gets sold during precisely the moment people are least equipped to evaluate a decades-long obligation clearly, surrounded by pools, cocktails, and a countdown clock specifically designed to compress the decision into a single afternoon. Ask about the exit before you ever ask about the price, and if you're already inside a timeshare, know that legitimate paths out do exist, even if they take longer to find than anyone would like. If this helped, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, do you know anyone who's tried to get out of a timeshare, and how did it actually go for them? I'll see you in the next one.